We have the most packed schedule, so I'm going to save my opening remarks for the close if we have it, because that's how good this schedule is, and I really want to thank the mayors that are up here. This is our week, this should be our month, and this should be our year. We finally got Washington's attention. Washington is focused, I think, at long last on the infrastructure that is the core of the work that we do. And we have a superb lineup of folks here, and I want to thank Mayor Landrieu for appointing me to oversee our task force on infrastructure. Our agenda is here in the red. We're not going to go over this today, but please take it with you. Look at it. It's everything from our talking points to our principles that we have workshopped through our different committees and through the leadership of the conference. But we want to open up first by welcoming the Special Assistant to the President for Infrastructure Policy. DJ Gribben is the best person to ever have this post because he's the first person ever to have this post too. But even if he wasn't the first, his background and his expertise in infrastructure is really incredible in this country, on the private side, now on the public side. And we've been pleased that we have an administration that has put a position in the administration as a special assistant working on infrastructure. But I know we are eager to hear detail, not just what that position is. And so I'm going to let DJ open up to say some words to us. He has to get busy with the infrastructure package, which is in its final drafts, I believe, and he can tell you more. We're going to open up to questions for him for about 10 minutes after he presents, for about 5 or 6 minutes. He'll then have to depart, and then we'll go through the rest of the presenters that we have, these great mayors that are up here, and then open it up to everybody. So thank you, DJ, for being here. I'm going to toss it right over to you with short introduction, and thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for inviting me to be part of this gathering. I'll get into a little more detail, but just want to start with the fact that one of the primary compelling forces behind our infrastructure package is the fact that we want to return more decision-making, more control to state and local governments. So we've been spending a huge amount of time with mayors, with governors, with county executives, with tribes. But I started in this role not too early on, and Mayor Garcetti invited me to come down to Miami, where we co-hosted a panel. And so the mayor's been a great partner and a great visionary in terms of how does the federal government and state governments, local governments work together to develop our nation's infrastructure. So as the mayor mentioned, I am the Special Assistant to the President for Infrastructure. I am the point person in the White House on infrastructure, which is governmental infrastructure for a large part and includes the broad spectrum. So unlike in the past where we talked about infrastructure in silos, highways or ports or airports, in this administration, we consider infrastructure across the board, and we're trying to improve our nation's infrastructure in all asset classes. So let me start by talking about the two major priorities that the president has. So we are on the verge, you probably heard yesterday that the president said he's going to mention infrastructure in the State of the Union, and then a week or two after that, we're going to release our principles to the Hill. They will be relatively detailed. We spent a lot of time working with folks in this room, working with our governors, working with people on the Hill, and working with communities across the nation, and coming up with a package that will truly make America's infrastructure the best in the world. But we have two overarching principles as part of that. One is we want to increase infrastructure investment by $1 trillion. So that is a significant additional investment in infrastructure. We also want to shorten the permitting process to 2 years. So we are going to go to Congress with a very detailed, robust way to accomplish those two objectives. And in that transmittal, we will also say, but we are comfortable changing out any of these methods to get to those two goals. So we are very open to ideas of how to accomplish those goals. We don't believe that we have all the answers. We're going to have a very good first draft, but we imagine this will be an iterative process where we go back and forth. You should also know that our infrastructure proposal, when we introduce it, will not include new revenue as part of it. I think we are the only administration in the Clinton administration that has not opposed an increase in the gas tax. We don't support it, but we don't oppose it either, because we want to be neutral and keep options on the table. But that is very deliberative. Some have suggested what we should do is come forward with a bunch of additional pay-fors that would help increase spending on infrastructure. That's not an irrational strategy. But if you look at what happened to the Chamber of Commerce when they released a very detailed, very well thought-out plan, all that was covered was the 25-cent increase in the gas tax. And so the reason I'm telling you this is We are going to be open to conversations about how to increase beyond the $200 billion. The investment needs to be made in infrastructure, but we're not going to start on that front because we think that's a decision that needs to be made collectively between the White House, the House, and the Senate. So that's the quick overview. I think the thing that we're most excited about is the opportunity when it comes to permit approvals and how we can get things done, how we get a project permitted in 2 years. The president's been very clear that he does not want to have greater environmental damage as we do projects, but there's no reason why we can't analyze a project and mitigate appropriately and get it all done in a 2-year window. And so there will be legislative components that we'll suggest. The president's already signed an executive order on environmental streamlining last August, and we will have additional actions that we will take administratively to try to get the federal government to work more cooperatively. We've coined a term called one federal decision, which means when you come to us with a project, it should be incumbent on us as the federal government to make one collective decision and not have you run back and forth between multiple agencies trying to get this permit, then trying to get that permit, and then have agency one second guess agency two and try to work through all that. So I think you will be quite encouraged when it comes to what we're going to do on the permitting side. With that, I think the other component that we've talked about is the $1 trillion of investment. Let me explain what we're not doing, right? We are not reducing current programs. We're not eliminating the Highway Trust Fund. We're not limiting state revolving funds to pay for the incentive funds and other things we want to do to generate $1 trillion of investment. So the vision, in essence, is we keep, for the most part, existing programs in place. So those formula programs will continue to operate. But when we add new dollars on top of those existing dollars, we want to use those dollars differently, and we want to provide encouragement to have partnerships between the federal government and local governments to increase infrastructure spending overall. And so we talked a little bit about when we were in Miami, the federal government actually only owns about 8% of infrastructure, and we actually fund only about 14% of infrastructure. So while we're a significant player, we've trailed far beyond our nation's cities and our states when it comes to the amount of infrastructure the federal government funds. So we're an important player. We want to continue to keep that role. But what we really want to do is provide opportunities for state and local governments to receive federal funding when they're doing what's politically hard and increasing investment in infrastructure. And so that's how we get up to $1 trillion. So with that, why don't I cut it relatively short so we have more time for Q&A.
So let me just take the chair's prerogative for a moment, and I think just ask a series then of yes/no questions to confirm what I heard. Then you can tell me if I misheard anything as well. So you're talking about at least $200 billion in direct funding.
Correct.
In real dollars, and $200 billion is a minimum, depending on what Congress
the president
and all
said
of us could push.
Correct.
Beyond.
At least $200 billion. Yeah.
And there will be no reduction in formula dollars to achieve that.
There's no reduction in formula dollars.
Okay. And that you are open to funding sources. You don't oppose, for instance, the gas tax increase.
Correct.
And new funding, though, above that will have some new rules, and we look forward to reading and hearing anything about that. Are those all right? Okay.
That's all right.
Wanted to put those on the record for us. We appreciate that preview. I'm sure everybody's scratching their head and has like 17 more. So questions for DJ Gribbin or comments? Yes. Mayor.
Mr. Gribbin, good to see you again. Thanks for coming one more time.
Would you just re-identify yourself for him in case he doesn't remember?
And I'm going to tell you who I am in a second. I'm Mayor Douglas Athis from Garland, Texas. And one of the projects we're looking at in North Texas is the Interstate 635 East Extension. One of the components to make that work, to integrate within the current system that's already been built, is managed lanes. We're receiving, of course, some local political pressure against that. But North Texas has been very successful in building out its systems. In fact, we've done well enough that I think the federal government's looking at how we've done it as good examples, the partnerships that we've had in place. It would be very, very helpful to have in this infrastructure bill that when it goes through, as much assistance to the locals to be able to do things, to make the decisions on federal projects. And because we've got 2,000 elected officials in North Texas represented through our MPO that have all made the decision of how to do this, and we've got 2 or 3 politicians in the way. So is there a way that we could have in the infrastructure bill just enough leeway for local officials to make the decision, send the money directly to them? we actually don't need money. We can do this. We just need permission to do it right.
Okay, fantastic. So I love the don't need money, because that makes you a really small class of people.
But the rest of
to
us
talk
do,
to.
just for the record.
No, let's stay with the don't need money part. That's much easier. So,
Well, there's a lot of sources already coming together. We've already
Yes.
earmarked them, and we just need permission to be able to build the proper system.
all right, so that is an excellent question, because it goes to the heart of the biggest component of new funding, which we want to use for an incentive program. So what we would say to you is, you as a city, a county, a state, a collection thereof, can come to us with a proposal to raise new funds and to spend those funds on infrastructure. And what we will do then is have a competition among different proposals, so that the federal government would come alongside of you and say, okay, if you're going to invest this much and you're asking for a relatively small federal contribution, we'll be part of that. But those funds would flow to the applicant. So they don't go through the state, right? They would flow, and the applicant can be any governmental entity that would come to us, and then we would work directly with that applicant.
Yes, I'll go 1, 2. Go ahead, Mayor, yeah.
Thank you. Mayor Davis from the city of San Bernardino. This also is not a request for money.
Okay.
We already have the infrastructure. In 1994, Norton Air Force Base closed down and it's been repurposed as an international airport. And what we are looking for is some customs agents. We have the infrastructure. We have international air lines that want to come to our airport, but what we don't have is enough customs agents. And so we will actually pay for the customs agents, so it's really a benefit, but it starts to take advantage of existing infrastructure that's already in place that the government helped us to build. And so if we could have some assistance with getting some of those customs agents, that would enable us to be able to then provide the service to international carriers.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the infrastructure doesn't really touch on things like custom agents. That would be a different part that we're working on. Not that you don't need them to make the infrastructure work appropriately, but there's nothing we're doing right now that would touch on customs agents as part of the infrastructure bill.
Thank you. Patrick Wyan from College Park, Maryland. I have a question. I'd like to ask you about the envisioned transformative projects that will be part of the infrastructure package, and this actually may be a question more broadly about eligibilities too in the whole package. Are you looking? Because I think what we envision is transformative projects and can be really broad. It can be anything from the sort of new technologies and autonomous vehicles and infrastructure to help us manage that as that develops, to, for example, trail networks that help us to increase the number of people in a region that may be walking or bicycling to get around. And my question for you is, do you foresee any restrictions on the eligibility for transformative projects or for even for rural projects that will limit the projects that we as local governments are able to come to the government to ask for assistance and funding? Are you willing to work with us if we have an idea for a transformative project that really will help move the ball in our regions? Will you work with us to find a way to do that, even if it's maybe not sort of the new autonomous vehicle, the new shiny object sort of thing?
Sure, no, and the answer to the question is absolutely yes. So just a little bit by background. So the program will be incentives, it'll be rural funding, transformative, and we're going to plus up our lending programs. So on the transformative bucket, on all of those, the spirit is we don't provide federal funds in pre-designated classes. So whenever possible, we're trying to give you the flexibility to say, as a mayor, my infrastructure need is water, or my infrastructure need in a rural area is broadband, or my infrastructure need is highways. So we're not going to try to chunk that up into little buckets and give you money for things that maybe are not your priority. We're going to let you determine what your own priorities are. And when it comes to transformative, we get a lot of pushback, and Matt can talk about this from the House side, because throughout this whole process, we've had a fantastic relationship with both the House and the Senate, and we've had some very open, frank, and occasionally hurtful conversations. But no, seriously, great relationship between the White House and the Hill. And we get a lot of pushback on this transformative idea. Like, well, what is it? We don't know what it is. What's it going to be? And that's kind of the whole point. Is what's happening in our nation's infrastructure is we're seeing opportunities. You mentioned autonomous vehicles. There's a whole number of technologies out there where American infrastructure, 20, 30 years from now could look vastly different than it does today. So the whole point to having transformative is for you to be able to generate ideas that we will not have thought of and come to us, and as long as you can demonstrate that that's, truly impactful and will provide a return on investment, then we as the federal government want to partner with you on that. But we haven't ruled anything out in terms of what is transformative. And similarly, on the incentive side, whether it's a highway, I used to be Chief Counsel of Federal Highways and General Counsel at USDOT, and there's just sort of this long-running street fight between highways and transit. And we're trying to get above that and say, listen, we want to fund infrastructure. You all figure out whether you prefer highways or you prefer transit. We sort of want to get out of the game of picking what we think might be in your interest and allow you to make that decision.
Mayor Hancock?
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. Mr. Goodman, let me just ask questions just so we're on the same page. And I want to just be fully transparent. I come to this conversation pretty skeptical of the administration's plan because of the concern about where the dollars are coming from. I think there's still a lot of understanding that has to be done on this issue. And I think mayors stand behind an infrastructure plan. We just want to make sure that we don't see critical programs like, and I want to make sure we understand and that we're clear. That I heard the same thing that Mayor Garcetti laid out. The Highway Trust Fund is not a part of the equation, pay for it. Amtrak, New Starts, Tiger, these are not programs that are going to be cut in order to pay for this $200 billion. And if not, can you talk a little bit more about what federal discretionary dollars the administration is looking to target to help pay for this program?
So our budget has a whole series, I'm talking about last year's budget, has a whole series of places where we reduced investment and then a number of places where we increased investment, defense and infrastructure being probably the most notable. So there are reductions, as you know, in last year's budget when it comes to Amtrak, when it comes to transit, when it comes to a number of programs. So those, we will propose repurposing those dollars. But what we're not proposing is eliminating the Highway Trust Fund or eliminating state revolving funds. So the major delivery mechanisms for funding for infrastructure should remain in place. We do want to repurpose some dollars, so I can't tell you categorically there's going to be no cut in any infrastructure project in the federal government. There will be, Senator Schumer took a shot at us last year and saying we're cutting a bunch of infrastructure, but some of the things he counted as infrastructure, I don't think most people in this room would consider to be infrastructure. So we'll continue to have this conversation. I think the point is the administration wants to repurpose a significant amount of federal funding in infrastructure, and the administration is also open to opportunities to increase that level if it's sensible and if we can reach agreement with Congress. So I would take that message away from it as opposed to fixating too much on exactly where dollars are coming from and where they're going.
Do you want to follow up on that?
Please, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate it. And I don't, this is where I think our challenge comes from is how we, as cities, we don't want to see opportunities to have more federal money come in, but yet on the back end, we're having to backfill the federal government's withdraw and pull back on, particularly discretionary dollars that might hit the social fabric more. So that's where I think we're going to have to find greater understanding when you say reduction, and we've looked at the budget, so we're all going to have to go back and understand truly where you're talking, because if we're looking at a net 1 point whatever more dollars for every dollar you're cutting or you're going to spend or invest in infrastructure, then as cities we lose. And so it may not look like infrastructure, but we need to know where it's coming from and ultimately what the bottom line is for us. So that's the point I want to make.
Yeah, again, we're very sensitive to that.
We press your button, just, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I guess that time's out. We're very sensitive to that, so please share that analysis with us, because at the end of the day, this isn't supposed to be a net loss for cities. That's not the goal. The goal is to have $1 trillion of new investment in infrastructure and have American infrastructure be significantly better tomorrow than it is today.
We can definitely help with that math for sure. So we got one hand, but our president just walked in. I know how tight his time is. You okay for a second? Okay, right here, and then Mark, and I know you're going to be speaking a little bit too, so I want to make sure we have time for you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. I'm Robert Rickert from Macon, Georgia, and my question is whether or not the funding for emerging passenger rail corridors might be considered for funding by this infrastructure bill, and if so, it would involve multiple municipalities usually.
That's correct. Yes, it is. I mean, again, that falls into the bucket of, If the municipalities get together and they want to invest in that, we'd like to partner with them in that investment, and we're not precluding. The only thing that's not part of incentives is non-governmental infrastructure. So we're focused on governmental infrastructure. So what we don't want to do is, support a private utility or do transmission lines where we're distorting the market with federal dollars. But if it's governmental infrastructure, and in rural areas that would include things like broadband and electricity distribution, so rural governmental definition changes a little bit. But yes, again, our intent is to not second guess your priorities, for you to come with your priorities, and we partner with you on those priorities.
Thank you.
Mark?
DJ, you mentioned that the plan's not going to suggest any new revenues, but what about existing revenues that are being collected and are not being spent? And I'm speaking specifically about the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. There is $9 billion there that is not being used as it should be, and it certainly would be a great injection of capital and infrastructure for the seaports and inland ports of our country.
Yeah, so those trust funds, and there are a couple of them where the federal government is not expending all that's coming in. It takes me back when I started working early days in the 80s on Capitol Hill, where that was the role of the Highway Trust Fund, was to help offset the deficit. The administration's position is if funds are going to a trust fund, they should be spent in that way, or we shouldn't be collecting them.
Before DJ leaves, Mr. President, do you want to say a couple words? Sure. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership. I showed everybody the red booklet and the principles you put forward and told them that that's their nighttime reading tonight. So.
Mayor Garcetti, thank you for your leadership, and mayors, thank you so much for being here. And DJ, thank you for being here on behalf of the President. The mayors of America look forward to working with you and President Trump and engaging you in a way that I hope would be constructive for all of us. All of the men and women around this room are in the business every day of building and rebuilding America on time, on task, and under budget. You're looking at folks that actually are putting dirt, turning dirt every day, and are doing a lot of great things, from sewer systems to schools to airports. It's clear to us that there's a $5 trillion deficit. In order for us to continue to compete on a global scale and continue to complete locally, we have to do this, and we want to work with you in Congress to find a way to do it. We are and have strong feelings about a couple of things. The folks in this room turn dirt faster than anybody else in America, and we think that cities are the place where a lot of this money ought to land because we're doing it now, and there are lots of examples around this room. Secondly, we believe in flexibility. We believe in going fast. We believe in making sure that we build quality things so America can be strong again, and we have put together an agenda that we want to give to you today to pass on to all of the individuals that are helping draft this bill, and look forward to moving America forward. So thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And if you have other questions, thank DJ, please. Thank him for being here. And if you have other questions, we are in close communication through the conference, and we'll make sure to follow on. The good news is we're only 6 minutes behind, so we are going, and I have a minute to introduce everybody, so with your indulgences, I'm just going to say your names as I turn it over to everybody, and we'll pick up that time. Our first speaker, we've got these extraordinary chairs and a vice chair of each one of the component committees of infrastructure for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. First is Harry LaRoseliere, who's the new chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He's the Plano mayor in Texas, and we're so pleased that he stepped up in that leadership. Thank you for that, and we'll hand it over to you to talk about transportation.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti, and thank you for the introduction, and share a few words and comments about our infrastructure needs as it relates to transportation. I want to start off by saying how refreshing it is to really bask in your passion for infrastructure, and personally see your leadership and experience in that. I truly appreciate the opportunity, and thank you, Mayor Landrieu, for the confidence in placing me in this position. Since infrastructure is really the backbone of transportation and broadband communication, I'd like to make a few points that all mayors and everyone in America knows that we do have an infrastructure deficit. As Mayor Landrieu said, $5 trillion, to put a round number to it. Some of it is more noticeable to some than others, but it's pervasive and it's broad-based. That said, the nation's needs in rural areas are no more pronounced than what we see in other parts of our country. And what I like to say is that where a city ends is where rural begins. So to me, there's no distinction and there's no difference. And really, in terms of given the scale of the challenge before us, Mary Landrieu's agenda for the future, released in our annual meeting, focuses on infrastructure, and it urges really two key tenets: invest the dollars in the areas where the need is there, metroplex, small urban areas, and rural areas as well. Invest in all of them, and ensure that these resources reach every part of the country, and we know that that makes sense on a broad-based scale. Our conference plan urges the existing mechanisms that are in place. HUD, U.S. Department of Transportation, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. Our plan calls for use of CDBG funds as one of the means to target some of our most challenged neighborhoods and provide them the opportunity to thrive. And the Department of Transportation state local block grant program can also help redirect resources effectively. That's not to say we're not open to new resources and only look at existing programs. We're open to and supportive of the administration to call for new funding commitments to discretionary programs. Though the details are not clear to us at this point, we are open and welcome the possibilities. In the past, we've supported Tiger grants, and we support Chairman Schuster, who created the new discretionary programs to address freight, multimodal, and new technologies. But as a conference, we have consistently said, as it relates to infrastructure, we need a broad-based commitment to all parts of our nation. I'd like to say this as a final note, that as it relates to broadband, we've discussed this morning at our prior meeting that we should not confuse upending local. A lot of people call it local authority or local control. In Texas, we call it local freedom. The local freedom to manage and control our own property. And we'll provide real responses to challenges of broadband development, especially to those in rural areas as well. Rural broadband development is going to need resources, including public resources, but that should not mean undermining the local management of right-of-way of our urban areas and pretending that's a real solution. This should not be a zero-sum game. Finally, note the four-panel handout describing the local government funding efforts in key infrastructure sectors. I believe it's in front of you, and we'll have copies for you if you need. The table in these handouts show that the cities and counties are doing their part, and that the effort are largely outpacing those of state and federal partners. How about that? Cities are winning, who would think? To me, the state and the scale of infrastructure challenges before us means that all of us need to do more. It's all hands on deck. Finally, let me thank, again, we thank DJ Gribbins for joining us this afternoon to talk about the administration's plan, and look forward to hearing Chairman Schuster's staff and Mr. Sturgis. And thank you, Mayor Garcetti, again for all you do on this committee.
Thank you so much, Harry. And we will be hearing at the very end from Matt Sturgis, who we're so pleased is here from Chairman Schuster's office and from the committee in the House to also update us on the congressional side. But next, John Mitchell, who's the mayor of New Bedford, Massachusetts, and chairs our Energy Committee at the conference, will speak next. John.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will stick with the lightning round approach to the program, but I do want to thank you for your leadership, and you, Mr. President, for your leadership in pulling together the conference's position. This is a very compelling document, and I just suggest that everybody take it to heart and internalize it. This is the way we should be doing it, thoughtfully and forcefully and unequivocally, and that's how we're going to get what we want. I'll just speak briefly about how the work of the Energy Committee was baked into this document. So in September, the Energy Committee met in New Bedford to talk about how we can work energy interests, the energy interests of the cities, into both the infrastructure bill as well as the energy bills that are at different stages of development in both houses. And what emerged from that discussion with folks from industry as well as numerous mayors who've been leaders in this space was a set of ideas that we enumerated and have spread around. Tom Cochran dubbed them the New Bedford Principles, Mr. Chair, so I fully embrace that branding opportunity, and have been, yeah. So internalize that as well. But what we tried to do with that is to really be clear about what we're looking for, and in essence, it's all about building on the success that cities have had in rounding out and diversifying their sources of electricity, especially renewables. So, as I look around the room, I see numerous mayors who have been leaders and who have, who've built out solar capacity and wind capacity, and have been really aggressive at building out electric their electric car fleet. I mean, the list goes on and on. And we know that as people are moving into cities, and as people are, and as we combat the effects of climate change, we need to make sure that our resiliency efforts are based on a diversity of sources of electricity, and that they're conserving electricity as well. And so that's what it's all about. We're not going to grow as cities if we don't have reliable sources of electricity. So in that vein, what's been baked into this document are efforts that I think are overall very compelling. So continuing the tax credits that have allowed the solar and wind industries to grow. In my particular city, we're about to jump in with both feet into the offshore wind industry as it starts to make its way over to the United States from Europe. But there are also plenty of people like Chris Watts from Denton, whose cities are more or less powered by land-based wind. We need to keep at that. In addition, if we needed any reminder, grid security counts for an awful lot. We need to protect our cities from cyber attacks and natural disasters, and there is a market gap when it comes to critical infrastructure and keeping critical infrastructure powered, whether it's hospitals or jails or whatever, or our own city buildings. So the federal government has a role to play in that, and that's reflected in this document. So it's a good, from the Energy Committee standpoint, Mr. Chairman, it's a really good document, and I look forward to advocating for its advancement with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor. And next, Dave Bergers, the mayor of Lima, Ohio, who is the Vice Chair for Water on the Environment Committee. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about water. We got power, we got water, transportation, and broadband. And we'll hit brownfields after that, ports and exports, and then we'll hear from the Hill and open it up from there.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. I'm taking the place of Mayor Stanton, who was unable to make today's meeting. And I guess I want to begin with the same remark that a colleague on the other end of the room used in his comment, that I am skeptical about what's being proposed. I'm skeptical because it seems the bill that's being offered seems to imply that cities aren't doing their share and that we need to be, quote, incentivized to take care of ourselves. But the fact is, water and sewer, of course, must be part of any infrastructure package that is offered. But cities already spend $118 billion each and every year to take care of cleaning our drinking water and cleaning our wastewater. And from 2001 to 2015, our local governments and water districts invested nearly $1.5 trillion. We're already spending $1.5 trillion. We're already leveraged. This constitutes 98% or more of all the public water and sewer expenditures in this country. 98% is being performed by us at the local level. The federal contribution now is minimal. They walked away years ago, and they need to come back. And this needs to be more than loans with interest and principal payments. Local debt with our communities in 2015 reached $1.8 trillion, and that's up from $1 trillion in 2001. Cities already borrow to take care of many categories of infrastructure. And many cities are near or at the brink of our borrowing capacity. We cannot meet local service delivery needs or our primary purposes of public safety and achieve national goals without a greater federal partnership, which means dollars in the forms of grants. What we need is a combination of increased federal assistance, other investment tools, and a regulatory program that takes into account the high cost of unfunded mandates. Just the other day, we were told at the Mayor's Water Policy Committee meeting that the new lead and copper rule that is already coming at us is likely to cost us another $45 billion, on top of all the CSO, TMDL, and all the other mandated costs. And they're not promising a nickel to us. This is our time to be clear about who's already doing our jobs, and it's local government.
All right. It's an important point that while we heard what is in, we didn't get a detail about what's left out and what people don't even expect to put in because it's been so long since the feds have. So I really appreciate that point. We'll come back to that in our discussion. Next, Chris Bulwich, who's the mayor of Elizabeth, New Jersey, and chairs our Brownfields Task Force, will speak to us about that important part of our urban infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mayor Garcetti, and to President Landrieu and the members of the panel, as well as my fellow mayors. By the way, Dave, that was terrific. Just want to let you know that. Despite the deep partisan divide on the Hill, as we all know, I'm pleased to report the Conference of Mayors priority in Brownfields redevelopment has actually brought some Republicans and Democrats together. As many of you know, brownfields are abandoned or underutilized properties that are redeveloped due to real or perceived environmental contamination. There's an estimated 400 to 600 brownfields in every congressional district throughout the United States has at least one brownfield. The Conference of Mayors priority in 1990s was that we worked with the EPA and Congress to design a program where communities could apply for assessment and cleanup funding along with liability protection for innocent developers. It's been a wonderfully successful program. It's leveraged over 123,000 jobs, $23.6 billion, and in fact, for every EPA dollar spent, it leverages approximately $16 other dollars in other investments. Last year, Mayors Gary McCarthy, John Mitchell, and myself all testified on the Hill on what we thought that a Brownfields bill revitalization should include. Both sides of the aisle were extremely supportive, and working with the conference, we helped design a bill that would improve upon that program. And a couple of things that the bill recommends is it creates a multi-purpose grant up to $1 million, increasing the cleanup grant amounts from $500,000 to potentially $750,000. It expands liability protections for innocent municipalities for voluntary and involuntary acquisitions. And another issue that was debated quite a bit was it allows nonprofits to apply for cleanup grants. And on November 30th, our Brownfields bill passed in the House, check this out, by a vote of 409 to 8. The Senate Environment, yeah, there you go. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee also unanimously passed this bill. So we're waiting for action by the full Senate, and we're hopeful in the House and Senate staff are currently in negotiations. I want to thank Judy Sheen of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who's been diligently working this issue for the conference, and hopefully we can resolve some of the minor differences in these bills. We've been told by the Hill staff they would like to see in brownfields redevelopment as part of the infrastructure bill, and I think we've all seen the leaked copy. I was with Senator Menendez and Senator Booker. They have a leaked copy of the President's infrastructure plan, which is kind of information on its own. And in that leaked copy, it talks about brownfield redevelopment and Superfund reform. So given the proven track record of this program and a tremendous opportunity that it presents in every community, we would like to see this program get a substantial increase in appropriations. We hope that the White House and the Hill agree with us, and I want to thank the mayors for their leadership on this issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. Great report. Finally, Mark Stodola, who is the mayor of Little Rock, is also the president of the National League of Cities, is going to talk to us about ports and our exports as well. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Mayor Garcetti, and thank you, President Landrieu. The Ports and Exports Task Force has been at work long and hard on the issue of increasing funding for our inland waterways and our ports and our seaports in our cities. I want to thank Tom Cochran and his staff, Dave Gatton in particular, for staffing our Metropolitan Ports and Exports Task Force. It's been very, very helpful to help pull us together on making this a priority for people to pay attention to. You know, as I mentioned in my question, we still have a problem with the federal government collecting more revenues in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund than Congress appropriates annually. This has led over time to a $9 billion surplus in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Absolutely ridiculous. It's sitting there and it's not doing anything to help maintain the ports and seaports of our country. The last water resources bill in Congress did commit a very gradual increase in the percentage of revenues appropriated, but it was very, very small fix. We need to have the full appropriation of the funds collected annually from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, and we need a commitment from Congress to unlock the $9 billion of trust fund surpluses. I'm glad to hear that DJ Gribben and the administration agrees with us. If it's going to be collected, it needs to be spent. And some of people may say, well, these funds are already spent because it's part of the consolidated federal budget process. But in reality, if that money in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund were removed from the budget, taken off budget, we could immediately spend $9 billion that's available to our ports. So we should continue to push for this. We need to push Congress to unlock this fund, this funding source, and allow us to upgrade our ports around the country. I know this is very important to Mayor Garcetti, and as a large amount of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund money comes from the LA and Long Beach
Which we gladly donate to our competitors around the country.
Well, I want to remind him, however, that the inland waterways transport over 40% of our agricultural goods and commodities as well to get to those seaports.
Settle down, kids, settle down.
You know, people didn't realize that, you know, here in Little Rock, Arkansas, we've got a great inland seaport, river port, and it's very, very important to the issue of commerce in the country. And so, but to that point, we need to be pushing for the revenue to the Corps of Engineers through the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, so that inland ports like my own can have access to greater resources. You know, there's a river in the middle of the country called the Mississippi River that's in need of some updated locks and the very proper transport for all of these goods and commodities. We also believe that there needs to be new funding to build multimodal infrastructure around our ports, including roads and rail connectors, on-dock rail, digital industrial infrastructure, to name a few of the things that are needed. Obviously, 21st century technology to help us move all of the goods and services that we have in these ports. And certainly there are other issues, but I think we can support on the Hill many of these ideas if we work together closely with the key committees to garner support. And let me add, Mr. Chairman, that these investments are key to growing exports globally as the economy heats up, as these investments become more important than ever. Thank you.
You're so right, Mark, and thank you for that. We look at this as moving not just people but goods, and it's a big part of, I think, of our nation's economic agenda. Thank you for your leadership on reminding everybody of that. And don't worry, there's plenty of money with $9 billion to go around. So finally, we are so blessed to have Matt Sturgis here. He's the staff director of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We've actually caught up time-wise, so we're well on track. He's going to be the last person to present. We just wanted to hear from the House side. And we thank Chairman Schuster, who many of us are personal friends with. He's traveled the country. He's passionate about infrastructure. We're sorry to hear about his retirement, but we want to send him out with a big bang. He wants to send America out, I'm sure, with a big bang, too, and we are here to help. So give us an idea. I don't know if you heard what DJ said or if folks updated you, but give us an idea kind of from the congressional standpoint. What's the game plan for what you all are looking at? And I'm sure you'll take that under advisement, and I've been thinking some things on your own. So, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Garcetti, very much for the opportunity to be here today. As the mayor said, I have the honor to work for Chairman Bill Schuster of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. It's a committee that is unique in Congress in the fact that we work in a very bipartisan nature. We have a demonstrated record of success finding paths forward to invest in our infrastructure in a climate that is not always easy to navigate through. And we're very, very excited to start out the last year of Chairman Schuster's chairmanship with some really, really unique opportunities. Last Congress, the FAST Act was passed and enacted into law, which was the first long-term surface transportation authorization in over a decade. It's something that the chairman and I know Ranking Member DeFazio are very, very proud of being able to shepherd through. And we're really excited because well, in my 16 years, I've never seen an opportunity where you have another bite at the apple to find another way to invest in our surface infrastructure and other infrastructure needs right away. It usually, you pass an authorization, it's 4 or 5 years. You kind of wait until the authorization is about to lapse, and you use that, and then that's how you kind of get movement to find a way forward. And because of the presidential election and the campaign, both sides were talking about infrastructure, and it's really a no-brainer. There's no Republican or Democrat bridge or port. They're all American infrastructure needs. And because there was so much conversation about it and so much leadership from President Trump on the desire to see a large investment in infrastructure, we now find ourselves on the Hill in a situation where we have the ability to hopefully enact monumental legislation that continues a big investment in our nation's infrastructure. Like I said, we at the committee are really proud of our bipartisan work and our bipartisan accomplishments. The FAST Act, as I mentioned, is the most recent example, and we also have done 2 WRDA bills under Chairman Schuster's leadership, the Water Resources Development Act, for folks who have inland waterway systems in your cities and towns, or a big port. You know this act well, and unfortunately, from 2007 to 2014, Congress did not do any new authorizations of Army Corps projects or any new water resource development projects. So we were able to get that kickstarted and work in a bipartisan manner to get that back on track. We've since passed a WRDA bill each Congress, and I'm excited that we've already done our WRDA kickoff hearing, but we're also looking to do a big WRDA bill this year, and that's something that I know is important to a lot of folks in here. We've also done PREA, the Passenger Rail Investment Act. That was done last Congress and became part of the FAST Act. Again, it just shows how Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member DeFazio are able to work together in an environment where bipartisanship is a necessary component to get something done. And just recently, as Mayor Bulledge noted, we wrote and passed the Brownfields Reauthorization Act with the help of all of you around this table. I think one of the most interesting stats you mentioned is there is a brownfield in every single member of Congress's district, and it's stuff like that that really, really helps move the needle and get the legislation moving. And luckily, there's infrastructure in every single member of Congress's district and every senator's. So there is a lot of expectation, I think, from the folks outside of D.C. The American public is clear. Poll after poll shows everyone wants Congress to get together, work together, do something on infrastructure. We need to make these investments. It's absolutely critical. And we're very excited, as I think DJ mentioned, we do have a really good relationship, and we're very fortunate to have open communication, open door policies with the executive branch, and the way we work at our committee, it's a very bipartisan approach. And we've had a lot of time to work together, and we're really excited to see the administration's proposal and principles come out in the near future. And hopefully at the State of the Union hear a little bit more from the President of the United States on next steps in the vision. So we at the committee can now roll up our sleeves and get to work. We're not starting from scratch. Since last year at the start of the Congress, we at the committee have held 21 hearings just on infrastructure investment. And that's at the full committee and subcommittee level. This deals with everything from brownfields and our ports and harbors to roads, bridges, as well as aviation. So it is something that we've been spending a lot of time on. We've worked with many of you. I think Chairman Schuster or our members have been to a lot of your towns and cities and heard directly from you. And we're really excited to get to work right after State of the Union, and as soon as the White House comes out, really get to work. And with that, I mean, that's kind of our snapshot, how we're viewing it. I wouldn't say we have any preconceived notion on what would be part of it, what wouldn't be part of it. I just know that there's a lot of interest and desire to see a finished product that can get to the President and across the President's desk.
Great. Well, we share that. Thank you, Matt. My crack staff just handed me notes saying that you just had a baby, and by that I assume that means your wife just had a baby. But my understanding is you came off parental leave to be here, so let's give him a congratulatory round of applause and thank him for being here in the midst of it. You have twins?
What's that?
Sorry, you pointed two. Was that mean twins?
No, it's
okay.
my second.
That's your second.
Just another boss.
Yeah, got you.
Another
Absolutely.
new boss. Another daughter,
boss.
so another new boss.
So I want to frame the questions in the 10 minutes that we have left. because I think that we heard skepticism, Mayor Hancock, understandably, and we've all felt that. We felt even justified anger, Dave, about the way that the federal government has left us with water, some careful optimism and success that Chris mentioned in terms of the brownfields, and a swirl of emotions and feelings around this. I think we also need some clarifications, which we will follow up. Is no reduction mean no reduction from the congressional levels, or no reduction from what the president's budget proposed, which were two very different things last year? So they may be saying no reduction, but remember that presidential budget was a significant reduction in many of those categories that Congress then restored. So we'll try to get some clarification on that as well. Also, what categories? Obviously, this doesn't move in a single piece of legislation, but as was mentioned, we'll move through a number of pieces of legislation, so I think it will require us to be nimble and not just look for one infrastructure package, but to make sure no one of these committees is left behind in moving forward what will get us to that big number. And just to reiterate, if you haven't looked at the book, what President Landrieu and I and the committee members up here have worked on, the following kind of 6 principles. Basically, the first one is go big or go home. Second is go to cities if you want to maximize economic growth. We know that spending at a state doesn't count. It has to come to cities. 3, promote partnerships. 4, provide flexibility for cities, something we can all agree on, I think, across party lines. 5 is think about resilience, what the impact on the environment and resilient communities is. And 6, generate jobs and careers at the local level, because the spending of this is a great opportunity for us to hire locally and encourage businesses locally. So obviously, we don't have the White House here to answer any more questions, but either questions for Matt and/or really, I'd like you to frame things not on your individual projects in this last section, but what timing we have and what next steps, so that we can unify our lobbying as much as possible, find the strategic mayors and towns where there will be members of Congress voting, and do what we can to get this at the right level, with the right rules, in the right categories, over the finish line. So with that, I open up to the members again. Yes.
I'm Jim Schmidt, the mayor of Green Bay. On the conference calls that we've had on infrastructure, we talk about cities, and we don't want to go into the states, but there's been chatter lately about MPOs and counties, and I just like to hear from other mayors that are we hell-bent on sticking with cities, because I really think that's important, and I think we could lose that with some of the chatter I heard in the last week.
Anybody else jump in? But to your earlier point on the trains and stuff, we know that, and as Denver has shown us, like regional leadership is where it's at. I think a lot of things cross city lines, and counties are very important players. But I think for all of us, we want to see just the local level that can spend. That doesn't mean just cities where I come from, but happy to hear other opinions in any of the other categories from our other members up here. Or Matt, if you have any, have you heard anything about counties?
No, not at this point, but I think we've spent a year, like I said, getting information, collecting it, hearing where people are, what needs and priorities are out there. In the coming weeks, we will be leaning on you all heavily to come to us with additional resources and ideas of how and what is needed, because no matter what the president comes out with, the Congress is going to have to act and come together, and that's going to take a lot of coordination across different committees on the Hill, I'm sure committees here, but we will rely on you all a lot to give us the straight answers to figure out what needs to get done. We've never been able to accomplish big legislation without the support of the mayors, and that's not going to change in this time. So at this point, I don't have anything specific on that, but if you have anything that you want to talk offline, we are.
Well, quick show of hands, does anybody oppose counties? Anybody want to make an argument against it? Otherwise, I think it's probably something that we all depend on and work with, and it would be good piece to add to our rhetoric when we're up on Capitol Hill. Seeing that, yeah?
Just as a follow-up.
Sure.
Former mayor of Atlanta, Shirley Franklin, and former mayor of Charlotte, Pat McCrory, had what they referred to as paired cities, which had common interest even though they were in different states. And they were promoting better transit options between paired cities, and I think you can find examples of that all over the United States, where you have two cities, sometimes in the same state, sometimes across state lines. So the concept of paired cities is one that I hope we'll follow up and explore.
That's great. Thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes, Mayor Hancock.
Mayor Garcetti, quick question, maybe you can answer this question. In this plan, one of the things I don't see here, which is a passion for a lot of us, and I know you, very important, port, is your airport. And was there any discussion about aviation infrastructure? And really, I know Mr. Sturgis, I mentioned PFCs wants to, Chairman Schuster, and he immediately says, I'm not touching that. And I understand why, but for big airports like LA, Chicago, New York, Denver, Dallas, Fort Worth, we have considered opportunities to improve our aviation infrastructure with PFCs by having the ability to control them and get off the trust fund. Has this been discussed at all in this report?
Not that I've heard of, no, and
Okay.
certainly not in our report. I mean, it's something that we're on the record, I think, as a conference, very strongly for. The main airport infrastructure pieces or aviation pieces has been the privatization of air traffic controller, which has some controversy on the Hill. It's promoted, I think it's actually supported by a bipartisan group of folks. So the Air Traffic Control Union doesn't oppose it necessarily. The White House administration wants to push that, but you know, you can represent some of the folks up on the Hill that have probably some differences of opinion there, but no. And I think it's important for us to incorporate that. So we'll make sure that our previous resolutions on that are included as part of our platform.
All right.
Anything, Matt, on the PFC, or we're still not touching that?
I've spent a lot of time on the air traffic control piece.
Yes.
3.5
Sure you
years of my
have.
life on that one.
You can almost land a plane, huh?
But I've also spent a significant amount of time talking about the PFC and hearing from airports all over this country. And we're aware of the desire out there, and I think as the FAA authorization bill moves through, I think the chairman's been public about his desire to get to resolution on a big reform package. And I don't think, at the end of the day, anyone's willing to walk away from a deal that might be there.
And for the uninitiated, it's passenger facility charge. So PFC is money that you charge your air travelers, and then you can put back into your airport. But it's been capped for a long time and not growing with inflation. So, any other comments? Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, this could be a question for you based on your relationship with DJ Gribbon. One of the things I heard him say was when he was talking about increased investment and the White House budget, there was a indication that there was going to be some repurposing in the budget, and that some of the funding that may be repurposed was transit funding. And I think for most of the large metropolitan areas that many of us are part of, transit's a vital part of what we need. And I'm just wondering if you had any indication as to what this repurposing of transit funding means.
Correct. I think money that hasn't been spent, but the big question is, will it be renewed, and will it grow? So there are balances in those. We know that right now. We have a subway that we're building out and trying to get the White House's help to just have a letter of sign-off for something that's already approved for money that's already there. So I believe that's what he's talking about. But it is a big question. I did not hear much transit. I didn't hear the word transit come out of his mouth. Now, some of the categories of what he talked about, new starts, he mentioned. He didn't mention Tiger, and there are rumors that Tiger gets obliterated, or at least in the proposal, then to come back to Congress, they may restore as they did before at whatever level. But I think that's a very important point. I did hear him say, though, that some of these funds would be up to us, whether we want to do roads and or transit. That flexibility, I think all of us would like to see, as long as it is in a smaller pot where we're competing against ourselves. So we'll try to dig in a little deeper and get some more answers on transit. Anything, Matt?
Yeah, if we're going to get a bill done to the president, it's going to be a bipartisan bill, and trying to change anything in the transit world, especially from a funding perspective, is going to be a third rail issue. And I know my chairman in particular is not, no pun intended, sorry. Fair enough. Is not looking for issues that are going to detract, but only to build support to get something done. So, he comes from Pennsylvania, and where he's from in the western part of the state is much different than the eastern part, but both of them depend on one another when they get their state dollars. And if you don't have transit in the east, it doesn't help the folks in the west who don't drive as much and spend money in the gas tax and going in the trust fund. So I would imagine that there's not going to be a huge appetite to really change a huge dynamic on transit.
Well, please follow up with me or any of these committee members. Let the record reflect we ended a minute late, but a good meeting from everybody. Thank you all for attending this. We will be working very hard in the next couple weeks, and stay tuned till just after the State of the Union when we go full bore. Thanks very much, everybody.